There's no such thing as sight reading. And this is the 3-note chord, or arpeggio, starting on note 1 of the D-flat major scale. Remember that a chord, or arpeggio, is always line, 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 or space, space, space in its root position. And then you plug in the key signature. And remember, the lines and spaces switch each octave. So if the low octave is space, 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 the next octave will be line, 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 and then it'll switch back again. We're going to do this 1 octave in treble clef. If you're practicing this on your own, use whatever clef you like, go as many octaves as you like. Don't just look at it. Looking at it is not visualization. That's just looking at the answer. Close your eyes if you need to. Imagine the staff. Picture it in your head. Treble clefs at the beginning. We have 5 flats in the key signature. That's how we know we're in the key of D flat. The lowest note will be a D flat below the staff. Right? Half note below the staff. Flat on the left. Space. If there's no line going through it, it's a space. If you're above and below the staff, no line going through it, it's space. Next space up would be F. F natural. Next space up would be A flat. That's our bottom 3 notes. Now we're changing octaves, so the next note up would be D flat, second line from the top, with a flat on the left. Coming back down, we have A flat, second spacer in bottom with a flat on the left, F is the bottom space, and D flat is the space below the staff with the flat on the left. Visualize the flats on the left even if they're in the key signature, so it helps you recognize the chord, the arpeggio, when you see it in music. So even if the flats are in the key signature, if you learn to visualize this way, you will still see those flats in your mind's eye. Now when you practice this on your instrument, you're going to visualize the note on the staff using your mind's eye. You're not just going to look at it. You're going to think the note names in your head, and you're going to imagine the melody that's created by this arpeggio, and that melody will be consistent with the melody created by the previous arpeggios that we've already learned. A major arpeggio has an identifiable sound. You can imagine that sound in your head even when the sound is not literally present. These are the things you need to know about the arpeggio, the chord, to make it usable from a literacy perspective. You have to recognize it by sight, by spelling, and by sound. Because those 3 things are going to be consistent anytime you encounter this arpeggio, this chord, in actual music. Now, will the D-flat arpeggio, D-flat chord, always be in the key of D-flat? No. It's in the key of D-flat today because we're doing a 3-note chord starting on note 1 of the D-flat scale, right? But remember, chords, arpeggios, can start on any note of the scale. And they don't always have 3 notes in them, right? You can have a 4-note chord, a 5-note chord, a 6-note chord, a 7-note chord, starting on note 1, note 2, note 3, note 4, note 5, note 6, note 7. There's 35 arpeggios in the key of D flat, and this is only one of them. The D flat arpeggio could be a 1 chord in the key of D flat. That means it's starting on 1. It could also be a 4 chord in the key of A flat. It could also be a 5 chord in the key of G flat. That means it's starting on note 5. It could be a 6 chord in the key of F minor. It could be a 3 chord in the key of B flat minor. It could even be a Neapolitan chord in the key of C major or key of C minor. And then it would be starting on the minor 2nd of the key. But regardless of how this chord functions within music, and it will have a context, it'll have a contextual function, it'll have something before it, something after it, and possibly something being played at the same time, but regardless, its root position spelling is going to be D flat, F, A flat. And so if you learn to recognize it by sight, by spelling, and by sound, those 3 things are going to be consistent every time you encounter this arpeggio, this chord, in music, whether you're reading, writing, or improvising. Now, if you learn to recognize the scale or chord in its original root position spelling by sight, by spelling and by sound, and you recognize the pattern, then even if it appears in music in another inversion, if you have the third on the bottom or the fifth on the bottom, your brain is going to recognize the pattern, recognize the group, and it will be immediately recognizable to you in any of its other inversions. But what about in harmonic spelling? Can't you have the C sharp major chord, C sharp major arpeggio? Yeah, you can, and the C sharp major arpeggio does sound the same as the D flat major arpeggio, but remember, from a literacy perspective, we're learning to recognize the arpeggio, the chord, by sight, by spelling, by sound. A C sharp arpeggio does not look the same as a D flat arpeggio. Low C sharp is on a ledger line below the staff. It goes line, line, line. Not spelled the same. C sharp, E sharp, G sharp is not the same spelling as D flat, F, A flat. And usually, when you see the C sharp major chord in music, typically it's not a one chord. Most, it's not that it never happens. There's music that is in the key of C sharp, but most composers, key of C sharp major has 7 sharps. Most of the time you're going to see 5 flats. 5 flats is easier to keep track of. So when you see a C sharp major arpeggio, C sharp major chord in music, usually it's going to be a 5 chord in the key of F sharp major or F sharp minor. So it's starting on note 5 of the key, and then you're going line, 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 or space, 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 and plugging in the key signature. Sometimes it'll be a secondary dominant of 5 of 4, 5 of the subdominant in the key of C sharp minor, right? But from a literacy perspective, although they sound the same, a C sharp major arpeggio is a completely different word than a D flat major arpeggio, right? And the context, the surrounding, if you see it as a C sharp major arpeggio, is going to be consistent. When you see C sharp major arpeggio, you're going to be in sharp key, right? So the surrounding context is going to be different too. I tell you how you'll never see it spelled, at least if the music is written by a musically literate person. It's never going to be spelled C sharp, F, G sharp. Yeah, that would sound the same, right? That would sound the same, but remember, the goal is to recognize the scale or chord the way you would recognize a word in a book. If people who read things and people who write things can't agree on the spelling, then we can't have written language. And there is no diatonic key that has a C sharp, an F, and a G sharp. That's a misspelling. That'd be like learning how to spell a word wrong and then wondering why you can't recognize it when you see it written down, right? Also, C sharp would be a line, F would be a space, and G sharp would be another line. So it looks like you have a wide skip and then some stepwise motion. It's not even going to look to your brain like you're playing a chord. Learning it that way would actually make it harder to read music. That would make you worse at reading music and make it harder to recognize. This is the opposite of the intended effect. Now, the good news is, though, if you learn to recognize this chord by sight, by spelling, by sound, and you're musically literate, even if you see it written in music and it's misspelled because of illiteracy by the composer or because of a typo, you'll still recognize it because you know how to spell it. Just the same as if you see a misspelled word in a book. Because of the surrounding context and the fact that you know how to spell the word, it's still recognizable to you. It doesn't even slow you down. My name is Mark Dooley. I've been a private music teacher for 36 years, focused on practical theory and music literacy. If you'd like to hear more, follow me. If you'd like lessons, contact me. If you can learn how to read words, you can learn how to read music.